Okay. All right. There's enough of us now, aren't there? We do have. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I'll start the meeting. So if you want to
let me know, Chair, Vince is running late.
Right. Okay. No problem. Okay, if you want to start the recording, I'll start the meeting.
Bear with me, Chair. It should be coming on any minute now. I've just put it on. It might be a little bit of a delay.
Okay.
Yeah, it started to record, Chair.
Okay, so just before we actually start the meeting, the recording has actually started. But may I remind everyone here that the meeting's being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. Just a few housekeeping rules. I think we're mostly familiar with them all now, but if you can mute yourselves when not speaking, and then that will avoid sort of feedback or any background noise when others are speaking. And if you do wish to speak, please put your hand up or use the raise hand function, and we should be able to pick between ourselves and the officers. We should be able to make sure we pick everybody up then. And then can we please make sure that all debates raised verbally and not via the chat function? And again, that's just for the sake of the recording. And also if it's on the chat, we could end up missing it by there as well. But if you do have any technical issues, put it into the chat, and then either myself or Democratic officers will be able to sort of pick that up from them, and I'm sure we'll be able to sort that out for you. If anybody's has got any difficulty hearing or being heard, can you let myself know or Mark as well as the officer? And if you do have a webcam and there are any issues, technical issues there, sometimes it helps if you turn it off. And that does help with the broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth. And as long as you can hear and be heard then that's the most important there. So it's just a welcome to everybody. We've got cabinet members and officers with us this evening, so a warm welcome to everybody there. So I'll go into the first item, which are apologies for absence. And I know Councillor Vince Bailey is running late. Do we have any others?
I've not had any through, Chair.
Right, okay. Item number 2 then, which are the minutes of the last meeting that they were held on the 19th of October. Are we happy to agree those minutes? Yeah, okay. And then item number 3 then, which is to receive declarations of interest, including any whipping declarations under the Council's Code of Conduct. So do we have any?
Chair, Councillor Driscoll. Yeah, I'd like to declare an interest in item 6, Auditor General for Wales, review town centre regeneration in Wales. Bear in mind I have properties in Houghton Road. Right,
okay. But as far as I'm aware, I think you've got dispensation to speak and vote at that meeting.
I have applied to it for standards committee. I don't know the answer. I don't know whether the meeting is yet. I think it's not for a while. I think it's next week or the week after.
Right. Okay.
If it's going to cause embarrassment, or I won't speak at that on that item.
Okay, Mark, have you got any advice there, just there for Councillor Driscoll? I know he has applied, as he said, to the Standards Committee.
Just to check, Councillor Driscoll, you've not actually had anything back yet in terms of dispensation then?
No, not yet.
Right, okay, in that case, if there's obviously an interest which is more than personal and falls into prejudicial, then obviously Councillor Driscoll would have to withdraw from the meeting.
Yep, okay, yes. I was probably going to leave it anyhow, Chair, because I'm not sure you noticed, but Wales are playing this evening, and I might just pop on down the road and watch them. Thank you.
Nobody else is going, by the way.
I bet you they are. That was a few there.
Okay then, no problem. All right,
Thanks.
well, we'll note that. And obviously, yeah, hopefully you should hear soon from them. So have we got any other declarations of interest? No? Okay. All right then, so we'll go into the very first item, which is the coastal monitoring annual update. And I think, Clive, you're going to take us through this?
It's not Clive,
oh,
Chair.
It's not here,
Gwyn tonight. Sorry.
Right. Okay. All right. So I'll hand over to you two then to take us through that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I just introduce Gwyn Nelson, who's the programme manager for the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre that's hosted by the Vale. Gwyn's going to undertake the presentation tonight because Clive, unfortunately, is not well. So I'll hand over to Gwyn to start the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Is everybody okay if I share a screen? I've got a presentation to. Great. Can we see that? Is it coming through? Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, I'm Gwyn Nelson. I'm the Programme Manager at the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre. Just want to say thank you for having me today. Basically, this presentation will explain who the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre are, what we're doing in terms of coastal monitoring in Wales, and what we're doing in the Vale of Glamorgan, what activities we've been up to. So, without further ado, we are a 100% funded organisation by the Welsh Government, so we're a public sector organisation, and we come from the Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management budget. A business case was put together for us to exist in 2017 by the Vale of Glamorgan Council, Gwynedd Council, Conway Council, and the Welsh Local Government Association. That was successful, and as a result of that, myself and another member of staff have been full-time in the Vale of Glamorgan Council since 2019. So just over 2 years, 2.5 years, we've been operating in the Vale. I personally have to report to the consortium, which is made up of those local authorities which came together to put the business case together. And we also have an advisory panel which includes NRW, the National Trust, Network Rail, Welsh Government, and the chairs of the coastal groups, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But ultimately, we are collecting data with a budget from Welsh Government around the coast of Wales. And ultimately, this data set will be serving the people of Wales. The most important part. Currently, we're 2 full-time staff based in the Vale of Glamorgan Council. We've also started an undergraduate placement scheme, which can help us train up people for flood and coastal erosion risk management. And we've leveraged additional funding for 3 placements. So we have a collaboration with Aberystwyth University. And we've used the government Kickstart scheme to take on extra placements. So we're currently a team of 6 monitoring the coast in Wales. I think the key point to emphasise here is that we are hosted in the Vale of Glamorgan Council. We are a Welsh Government funded, so we're looking at the whole of the Welsh coastline, but our skill set is based in the Vale, and we work very closely with the Vale personnel. I'm based at the Alps, and we also train up people within the Vale of Glamorgan survey teams, which help out on the beaches as well. So this is the aim that I was provided with when I got into the role as the Programme Manager for the Coastal Monitoring Centre. But the key thing is, for the first time, we're taking a national approach to monitoring the coast in Wales. And we'll be collecting the data which will help inform all local authorities and risk management authorities in Wales to make decisions to help protect against the flood and coastal erosion risk management going into the future. Our key objectives to do that is to centralise procurement of survey teams. So we have expert survey teams, which are from the commercial sector, who go out and survey the beaches, and manage those contractors through effectively through a framework. And we also have survey teams within other local authorities and ours across Wales in Gwynedd and Conway, who we've been training up to do coastal surveys. And finally, all of the data that we collect is freely available on our website for coastal officers, consultants, or anybody. In fact, a lot of universities use the data as well for research. That's all available on our website. So why do we exist? I just wanted to show this slide because it shows the huge and dramatic impact that coastal erosion and coastal floods can have in Wales. These are actually pictures that aren't from the Vale of Glamorgan. We're quite fortunate in the Vale that we haven't had such large scale issues as seen. But on the left, you can see this is a recent cliff fall at a beach called Nevin, which is on the Llŷn Peninsula in North Wales. My kids were unfortunate enough that I dragged them up there on holiday this year after this cliff fall. We went up in August, but it was in April, so they could see firsthand coastal erosion. On the right, this is the dramatic footage of Rhyl in North Wales again. This is actually a storm surge, which has flooded properties, as you can see, and you can also see a huge wave in the background as the area continues to flood. As I say, that coastal erosion flood risk in Wales is quite dramatic in places, but we're lucky in the Vale of Glamorgan that we haven't faced any issues like this in recent history. Moving on, so how is it managed within Wales? These are the shoreline management plans. There are 4 coastal groups in Wales who manage coasts in a collaborated approach. And the coastal groups were based not so much on political boundaries, but on large-scale littoral cells. There was a study done in the 90s, because we need to understand and not be restricted by political boundaries when we look at the coastal processes, because they obviously aren't restricted by political boundaries. Sorry for repeating myself. One local authority could make a change to their coastline, which could impact further down because of the large-scale sediments. For the Vale of Glamorgan, obviously we're based down here, and our boundary actually crosses into 2 separate littoral cells. So to the west, it's the Swansea and Carmarthen Bay Coastal Group, and to the east, the Severn Estuary Coastal Group. And within each of these coastal groups, there's a shoreline management plan, which is broken up into tiny units, which are called policy units. And within that, there are recommended policies on how the coast should be managed. So this is a nice illustration of an example policy unit, which is actually the mumbles, but it describes quite well how we've risk scored the Welsh coastline so that we can spend our budget appropriately, and how then that impacts on the Vale of Glamorgan. So the first thing I had to do when we got into my job was to understand where the highest risk locations were in Wales, but a set budget for surveys, and once that's spent, it's spent. So we wanted to ensure that we prioritise that. So we used those policy units that were in the shoreline management plans, and effectively scored every single policy unit through Wales. The Mumbles is a great illustration here. What you're looking at, this blue surface represents a 1 in 200 year storm event from coastal flood, and you can see the number of properties that are at risk. So we literally counted how many properties and how much infrastructure and important infrastructure on the National Receptor Database fell within that policy unit, and gave it a score. That helped us with the asset risk. We then looked at the coastal erosion risk. So we drew a line at the high water mark and put a buffer of 50 meters around that. So again, count out how many properties fell within coastal erosion risk. And we applied a factor using something called the National Coastal Erosion Risk Model, which takes into account the erosion rates along the coastline based on the geology. One of the other things we did was we looked at a study which had considered the whole of the Welsh coastline, and using available information, given an estimate of what the beaches were doing, whether they were accreting or eroding, and we focused the highest score on the areas that were eroding. As a result of this scoring, we're now collecting data across Wales and in the Vale, and the more data we collect with time, we'll get an understanding of exactly what those beaches are doing, so that beach behaviour will be more accurately informed going forward. And the bit I've skipped right at the beginning here is about the policies. So I mentioned the shoreline management policy units, which have recommended policies. And there are 4 policies which we scored again throughout Wales. Advance the line, of which there are no advance the line locations in Wales. The next one is hold the line, such as the Mumbles, which coastal defences are in place to protect the population behind. After that, there's managed realignment, which is locations where there may be some level of coastal defence, but we're in a position of moving towards not using that coastal defence anymore, for example, and no active intervention, which are often more natural locations where we just let coastal processes happen naturally. Within these policy units, for the Mumbles as well, for example, they looked at future epochs, so 20 years, 50 years, and 100 years, and put recommendations in place for each location as to whether we should continue to hold the line or possibly move to managed realignment or no active intervention, so that the lower management policies with consideration to sea level rise. So having scored the whole of Wales, this is what it looks like, and I wanted to show you this to just give you the Vale of Glamorgan perspective, really. What we're looking at here, these dark patches, it looks like cloud shadow, but it's actually a population heat map, and you can get a rough feel for the topography of Wales. So you can see areas here, Cardiff, Newport, large populations, low-lying, and I've put a huge red wall effectively, which represents high-risk location. Again, Swansea, a lot of the estuaries, low-lying with large populations, right on the coastline, high risk of erosion and flood. The Vale of Glamorgan, as you can see, is mostly a low white line, which means we're very lucky that we have a lot lower risk than large parts of Wales, based on that scoring system, which I showed in the previous slide, which is population and infrastructure at risk. So the next slides shows how that we've standardized our approach to collecting data now, because historically risk management authorities, so the maritime local authorities and Natural Resources Wales, were responsible for collecting data on their relative frontages, but each local authority, depending on what coastal knowledge they had, would collect data in different methods, different survey techniques, different frequencies, different densities, different budgets, different accuracies. So for the first time, we're now collecting data across Wales exactly the same way, and that allows us to integrate our data sets across the coastline so that we can build up an understanding of larger scale processes. This is just some examples of high density data. This is a more expensive data set here on the left, but it gives us more detail how the beach is moving. And on the right, we go back and collect lower density data sets, but more frequently, so that we can understand the seasonality. So beaches in the summer and the winter will erode and accrete. And this just shows an example of a comparison between a summer and a winter profile across a beach here. And then this slide, a little bit of a technical slide, which shows you some of the ways that we collect data. I mentioned earlier that we had funding, so we've got a research project with Aberystwyth University robotics team, and we've been developing high accuracy, low cost robots using remote control cars and drone positioning technology to autonomously drive the beaches and collect data on large sandy beaches. We trialed drone technology. This here is a mobile laser scanner, which is a high density data set collector. You can see here, this is something called a colorized point cloud. So although it looks like a photo, every single dot here is an accurately positioned location. We collected that off the back of an e-trike. We're trying to move away from traditional quad bikes so that we can reduce our impact on the environment during our surveys. And we've also collaborated with the Maritime Coast Guard Agency to collect bathymetric data, so data about the seabed across Wales. Here's some examples here, again with modern autonomous vessels which go out and drive themselves. They've got laser scanners on the top and underneath. They use echo sounders to collect data on the seabed. This is Fishguard Harbour, which is one of the collaborations that we've done, but we've also collaborated all over the Vale coastline too. So in the Vale, this is what it looks like. This is actually a screenshot on the right from our website. So as you can see, this is all the data we've collected in Wales over the last 2 years since 2019. I've just done a zoomed in for the Vale frontage. We've been collecting data seasonally and across multiple locations. As you can tell, in Barry and Penarth, where people live on the beaches, Aberthaw as well, due to the important infrastructure there, and as far up as Ogmore and Lantwick Major. I've shown a slightly different map here, so this is the Vale again, just smaller, but what I wanted to show is These are the policy units that I mentioned earlier. And in terms of our risk rating, these are the ones that were high enough in the Vale to warrant surveys. So we regularly survey Penarth, Barry, and the Nap are on the programme. Aberthaw and Lantworth Major are locations that we're going back quite regularly. If I move on to the next slide, we've also recently been lucky enough to acquire some very recent technology, which is groundbreaking really, but it's the use of a quadcopter drone with a mobile laser scanner attached to the drone. And that allows us to capture huge data sets. Again, this is a colorized point cloud from earlier this month. We were out in Penarth. As we mentioned earlier, the National Coastal Erosion Risk Model gives us an idea of erosion rates around the coast, and we're aware there's a lot of properties on the back at Penarth. The erosion rates from the model are pretty low compared to a lot of rates around the UK and especially in England, but a lot of Wales, we have a lot of hard geology on the coastline, which is quite fortunate. But by doing our own surveys, we're collecting, again, a colorized point cloud, so it's high density data, very accurate. We'll be able to get an accurate idea of what the erosion rates are in the Vale going forward. This is just a zoomed in snapshot. It shows the pier very nicely, but we actually have done a section from the Cardiff Barrage all the way down to Lavernock Point. And we come back here and collect profiles. So the lower cost profile data that we can collect seasonally and do comparisons and see how the beach is moving, start to build up an understanding of it. These are profiles that we've been collecting at Penarth. You can see it may not show up too well, very, very stable profile. Looks like shingle at the top of the beach is moving seasonally. We haven't had time as yet to get an understanding of the longer term trends, but that comes with time. We're in a place where we're now collecting methodical, standardized scientific data so that we can get a really good understanding of how that beach is performing, what the natural variations are. So coastal flood warnings. NRW have got a coastal flood warning at these locations. So we're signed up to these so that we can find out in advance if there's potential coastal flood. I've also been working with Plymouth University, who have their own coastal flood model, which automatically sucks in all the beach profile data that we're collecting as an organisation so that we can keep that up to date. And it's nice to have two independent flood forecast systems. This one's completely free as well, and you can sign up to a specific location. So we go back to Penarth twice a year and collect profiles, which updates a flood forecast system with the OWL sweep system. I just wanted to show quickly, because it might be of use to people, this image on the left. So what this shows, this isn't representative of the Severn Estuary because we have massive tides, but the tides come up and down and we can get a high tide. But during a storm event, due to the low pressure, there's less pressure on the sea, which means the sea rises during a storm. That plus the wind blowing behind it will also elevate the surface and blow the water into the land. Plus you get your waves on top during a storm. And if that coincides with a particularly large tide, we get something called storm surge. And if you remember that photo I showed you of Rill earlier on, all that damage was done in the space of around 20 to 30 meters, which coincided with the high tide and the storm surge. So we're very unfortunate. These events do come. We talk about the 1 in 200 year storm event or a 1 in 1,000 year storm event. Yeah, just to give you an idea of what storm surge is. And then finally, I just wanted to show some of the other good work that we've been doing as an organisation. Part of the reason that we do have risk to coastal flooding and erosion is because we've built properties in places which are now high risk and not necessarily sensible. So to get to the root of that problem, we've been developing a schools programme with Barry Island Primary School, which is to the new national curriculum 2022, to push this out across all primary schools in Wales. We've been lucky to have contributions from multiple international universities, lots of great collaborations, and we're really trying to tackle climate change head on without it being daunting for the kids, because the media does portray it in a negative light. So we're working with the kids, trying to be positive, and giving them the tools that they need to make the decisions, flood and coastal erosion risk management and climate change going forward. Yeah, so this is some of that work really. We built virtual reality tools. We've just had a lot of fun with this, going into the schools, very practical work. And that's everything. Has anybody got any questions?
Okay, thank you, Gwyn. Right, has anybody got any questions? No? No, I think
yes, Chair, I got one.
Right.
This coastal defences is going to cost billions of pounds over the next so many years and decades, isn't it? But also going to cost billions of pounds is the marine power schemes. Wouldn't it be interesting and a good idea, and you heard it here first, if they could sort of combine the two? So they could put these tidal schemes in front of areas that are likely to have coastal erosion. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. That is true. I think that has been considered for the Parrot estuary across the Severn estuary that they were looking, because they suffered with tremendous flooding over there in the last 5 years. And one of the ideas was to put a Severn barrage in that area, which would double as a flood defence. But yeah, that is a great idea and possibly a win-win solution in some places.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, Stefan, you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I wanted to, it was briefly just to say thanks for the report. I raised this issue of coastal erosion many years ago and wanted it as a regular, an annual update. This sort of quite surprised me as a report, because it's such a grand overview, if you like. And I'm still trying to take it all in, to be honest. But I'm going to get more hyper-local now and just ask, will you be continuing to give us reports regarding coastal erosion around the Vale? And of course, what I want to know about levels of sand as well, and whether there was sand loss.
Yes, I would love to. So in terms of an organisation, we were initially funded until 2020. We're on a 3-year phase. I'm a coastal surveyor by background, and I absolutely love this job. So I've been lucky to be here, and the Welsh Government have now approved another 5-year phase. So we're going to be around until 2026. We'll only start understanding the data when we start collecting longer term data sets. So in terms of 10 years, really, but we will, I'm more than happy to report as frequently as required going forward.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair, through yourself. Yeah, because at the moment, how many years data do we have? Only about, what, 5 years or so for the Vale?
I've been collecting data since 2019 in this organisation. So in terms of this new standardised approach, which is methodical, we're kind of at the start across Wales. The Vale does have some historic data. So as you can tell, we're embryonic, and we have done a lot, including the schools programme and all the other outreach that we've been doing. But then there will be opportunity in the coming couple of years where we can start looking back, analysing. And what we're trying to do is a key move going forward is developing a system whereby the public and key coastal officers can access our website and have a look themselves at what the sand levels are doing.
And finally, what are the sand levels doing here?
That's a broad question. I mean, do you mean in the Vale of Glamorgan? Can you give me a specific?
Yeah, the impression I was getting was that because of dredging and so on, I was very concerned that we were losing lots of sand, but there was other data saying, well, actually, yeah, you lose it, but it comes back as well, that it's not as drastic as first we feared. But, you know, what is the score?
Yeah, so that is a great question, and we will only really truly know after several years worth of data collection to to get an idea of what the sand levels are doing. But the reason we would know that after a length of time is because we haven't been collecting it long enough to understand what the natural variation levels are. All you need is one large storm to come, and it can take 10 years to recover, but it will recover. Like the geological and the geomorphological timeframes are huge, as is climate change. So we couldn't, for example, look at 2 years of data and be able to predict what's going to happen in the next 10 years, 20 years. Just like if you ask me what the weather's going to be in 3 years' time, I couldn't tell you. Although there's 100 years of weather data to go back on, I will then be able to look at that and say, well, it'll be within these temperatures, or, you know. So the more data we collect, the more accurately we'll be able to tell. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I get this understanding, then is really that because of the new way that you collect the data, and with all the your technical instruments there that you're able to use, that actually over a longer period of time we should actually have more accurate data sort of going forward. Yeah
100%.
Yeah.
We'll have a lot of good accurate data, and these trends, we'll start pulling them out. They'll only be as good as the amount of data that we've collected, but we'll start pulling them out and be happy to report them as we go.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, Andy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that, Gwyn. Very interesting little talk. I was just wondering, the data you're gathering is fascinating and quite instructive, but what is policy? I mean, we know that marine inundation is happening quite a lot in the south of Britain, partly as the result of isoelastic recovery. I mean, the north of Britain is actually rising out of the sea, and the south of Britain is sinking into the sea, which is something which has been known for a long time. So actually, what is policy? When you've gathered all this data, are we going to try and spend a lot of money on actually stopping the erosion and the sea coming in? Or are we going to do what they're doing more in the east and southeast of England, actually sort of, I don't know, accepting it with both hands and saying it's environmentally good for an awful lot of things, and that actually it's something which is geologically happening and we can't do anything about? We've been fighting coastal erosion for hundreds of years, and unless you throw a huge amount of money and engineering at it, it's a losing battle. So actually, what is the policy? Thank you.
That is a great question. And the shoreline management plans that I brought up earlier, so they were commissioned by the coastal groups and written by engineering consultants, so that they assessed the entire stretch of coastline and took into account many of the factors that I showed on the Mumbles, that Swansea stretch. So they looked at what the erosion rates were, how much the beach is behaving, what the sea level rise predictions were, and how many people live in those locations. Because, well, the simple fact of it is, as you mentioned, sea level is going to continue to rise. It's not going to stop, not within, thousands of years. The timeframes are, so we have to make a decision as to, is it economically viable to continue to protect properties, or do we look to other means, adaptation techniques that you talked about in the southeast. In the Vale of Glamorgan, as I mentioned earlier and showed, we're very lucky that we don't have anywhere near the challenges that are presented to the rest of the country. The erosion rates in England are huge, especially on the east coast. Haysborough is very famous for it, meters a year, whereas in the Vale of Glamorgan, for example, it's almost negligible in comparison in terms of coastal erosion rates. And in terms of flooding in the Vale of Glamorgan, we have very little properties which are built in floodplains. If you only have to look at Cardiff, neighbouring authority, and it's a very different situation over there, hence the millions of pounds that are currently being spent towards the Rumney project. But that said, as I've mentioned, the shoreline management plans have individual policy units, and they're broken down a little bit by local topography. and each one of those has a recommendation over those different epochs, so 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. So the relevant coastal officer, which is, well, my clog's on the call, but Clive Moon, will look at the policies, take in those recommendations, look at the data that we collect, and make decisions as to what needs to be done at each policy unit in terms of coastal defence.
Okay, lovely, thank you for that. Okay, does anybody else on the committee wants to speak? So I'm going to bring in, I've got two members who are not on the committee, if everybody's happy for them to speak. We've got Councillor Peter King and then the leader, Councillor Neil Moore. So Peter, did you want to come in?
If I may, Chair and colleagues, I just think I want to mention that I've got childhood sentimental connections with Fairbourne in North Wales or Mid Wales, whatever you want to call it, and we all know that its future is somewhat finite. And picking up points made by others that the decision is that you can only do so much, and it will be allowed to the sea will be allowed to reclaim it. But I really do welcome the work of this unit and the contribution it's making, because I think it's going to help inform us to make judgments and other decisions as the years progress. And if Stefan was part of helping bring it about, then I thank him personally, and anybody and everybody else who helped us set up what is clearly a much more comprehensive monitoring facility than we could have managed on our own. But then, just to throw in a real downer, I was following quite a bit of COP26 and even took part in a bit of a WLGA COP26 event. And then, because of my connections with the pension board, I've been looking at the fallout of COP26 and the advice for investments and other bits and pieces. And I've heard repeatedly everyone say something that I think Gwyn just said, and that is sea levels are going to continue to rise. And even if we reach net zero tomorrow, because the way things lag, the sea levels will continue to rise for, and the estimates vary, but certainly many years, and one speaker even suggested centuries. So I think we need to be alert to the fact that the coastline is going to change, and when I buy my next house, it's going to be much higher up.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Andy, did you want to come back in quickly?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just had to respond to Peter's comment there. Peter, sea levels have risen by more than 200 metres over the last 10,000 years. They've been continuously rising, and they'll continuously rise for quite a long time until the ice comes back. That's something to look forward to.
Well, can I just thank you, Andy, for that reassurance and comfort. But my understanding is that they're rising a bit faster than before. And the other point is, if you look at the Earth as a spaceship, I'm confident this spaceship will continue long after you, me, and everybody else we know are gone. But humans might struggle, but the spaceship will continue. It has done for billions of years.
Right, okay, I think we're veering there into a whole other discussion, which we could be here all night on, that as interesting as it is. Neil, did you want to come in?
Yeah, can I ask a couple of questions, because I've been involved in this council for a long time, and one of the things we've done probably over 20 years, maybe longer, 25 even, we did things like the Shoreline Management Plan at that time, which we went from St Anne's Head to Lavernock Point, and we used to get regular reports in relation to that. So presumably you still have that detail and that data, because I know that's been going on. It's at least 20, it's probably 25 years, where we've been having reports coming back on a regular basis. So the first point I was going to ask was, because I know you've only been there since 2019, is whether or not we still have that data and whether or not it's been used. Because I know it was used as well by the Seven Estuary Coastal Group, wasn't it? And because that's going back years and years and years. And the other question is going to be controversial, and Mark is on, so he's going to put his fingers in his ears. Have you had any involvement or given any information to Welsh Government in relation to the new TAN 19 requirements, which are likely to come in, hopefully not soon, because they are quite stark. And yeah, the fact is, as everybody said, sea levels are going to rise, but they're going to rise incrementally and not in one fell swoop. And I think what I'm concerned about is that unless we sort of calm this down a little bit and say, look, this is the evidence we've had over the last couple of years, or 10, 20, 30 years. These are the increments, and we therefore estimate from that, along with climate change, it's going to increase, but incrementally rather than wham. And that's what I'm afraid of is being suggested at the moment. So I'm just wondering whether or not you've had any involvement. And I see Marcus has come on. No, maybe would. Thank you.
So in terms of the first question, yes, there is historic data that was collected by Swansea and Carmarthen Bay Coastal Group, which will be able to help inform more historic trends along the Glamorgan coastline and further. When I started in the role, I was handed a massive cardboard box that was full of hard drives and DVDs, various formats of different data types collected by all the 15 maritime local authorities in Wales. So it's going to be a humongous task to go back through that data and find anything that might be valuable. It's all collected in different accuracies and formats and frequencies and densities. So it's going to be a massive task. And as I said, we're a team of 2 full-time people plus placements that we've leveraged. So we're actually using the government Kickstart scheme now. We've got a couple of graduates, one with a master's as well for 6-month projects, and we're starting to tuck into that historic data. So we did, when we chose our profiles all across Wales that we're now monitoring as best as possible, align them with historic profiles so that we can continue that analysis. So that was the first part of the question. And for the contributions to the TAN 15, no, the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre hasn't had anything to do that, but the tidal flood risk model and that they will have used, we also use the same one which was produced by Natural Resources Wales. So we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, using the same data. So yeah, and the other part of that question was. To
be fair, that covers it. It's just that I know that there was this data going back to the old Borough days or so, because it was, and whether or not it's been lost, that was the question as well, to be honest.
Yeah, we will get there. I think the other point, Tony, is just worth mentioning is, because it was mentioned earlier about the rate at which the sea level will rise. So we've talked about the long-term trends, but it's the predictions now are that the rate will increase potentially drastically as a result of human contributions really to carbon dioxide. So if we can help as individuals by reducing our carbon footprints and going into the schools and teaching about it, we should help reduce the rate at which sea level will rise. So it's going to rise, but if we can reduce that rate, that's a very, very difficult thing to predict. Each time the predictions come out, they're different to what they were last time. Unfortunately, they're generally worse. But it is an important thing to prevent the scaremongering, possibly.
Yes.
And I know what you're talking about. I've spoken to people, you know, within my social life who know what I do for a living, and they say, "Oh, I've seen a map, and my house is going to be flooded in 10 years' time," but it's not. You know.
No, exactly.
They get misinterpreted, and of course, the data is only as good as when it was produced, and more data will continue to be produced. So we need to just keep on top of those maps. Yeah.
No, that's good. That's brilliant. Thank you. And I know we're very lucky, as you said, in the Vale, because the TAN 15 doesn't affect us that much. In fact, it hardly affects us at all. But that's not the point really. It was I know places like Newport and Cardiff and Swansea are going to be hit eventually. But that's the point really, eventually. So I know Marcus wants to come in. Sorry, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, Marcus, did you want to add anything into that?
You won't be now.
No. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I've got apologies already because my phone, my computer has kicked me out and it won't let me come in. So apologies for that to start with. No, I just wanted to reiterate. Really, Gwyn covered it quite nicely, but really the TAN 15 is separate to the information Gwyn is talking about in terms of coastal erosion in many ways. TAN 15 is looking at the impact of climate change on development and takes account of previously the previous guidance took account of 100 and 200-year flood incidents. TAN 15 takes account of climate change and then applies flood incidents, 100-year flood incidents to that. So it's looking at the possible risk, taking account of climate change. It also has very much, as Gwyn has said, and the leader has said, there is this issue that the data that's behind it, or the information that's in it, is only as good as the data that's behind it. And we've already got some question marks over some of the data because it's constantly changing. So I think separating the TAN from this particular discussion is probably better. They're two related issues, but they're not the same. So that's all I'd say.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the TAN, I think, has ruffled a few feathers, hasn't it? Because I know I've seen it for down, because I worked on in Port Talbot now, and the TAN there has actually put the steelworks flooded, which could be very interesting in the future. It was sort of, yeah, it was, that did set a few hairs running. Okay, Pam, did you have any questions?
I just wanted to ask one question. If the quality of the sea changes, does that have different effects in different areas? You know, on coastal erosion, on different rocks, you know, because you've got some areas where it's very chalky, you know, because the quality of the sea does change, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm probably not qualified enough to answer that.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. No, I'm just trying to think. I mean, the only thing I'm aware of in terms of pollution is often related to, you know, water quality, sampling the Environment Agency or Natural Resources Wales do related to sewage, related debris, etc. Not so much maybe the composition of the water that might help the erosion rate. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Sorry for the pun, and I dropped you in the deep end then, didn't I?
Thank you, Pam. Right, okay. I don't think we've got any other speakers now. Anybody wants to ask any questions? I mean, it is an annual update, so I assume now that this report will come back next year. And you know, you never know, perhaps we'll have a little bit more data again then to even start building up that information. But it's been a really interesting discussion, really interesting presentation. So I'd like to thank you, Gwyn, and you, Mike, for coming along and doing that for us. So thank you very much. I mean, you're more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you really wish, or I know there is football on soon, so I'm sure a few people will be disappearing. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Hopefully I'll be around for years to come so that I can keep it.
Okay. Okay. Pam, did you want to put your hand down? Your hand is still up.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, we're going to move on to item number 5 then, which is Project Zero, delivering the climate change challenge plan. Now this is a reference now from Cabinet, and I think Tom, you're going to take us through this.
Yes, good evening, Chair. Good evening, Committee. Thank you for having me. As you say, this is a reference of a report of the leader. We're bringing it to your committee and to Corporate Performance and Resources committees as well, as part of your role in terms of overseeing the delivery of Project Zero and the challenge plan associated with it. We have also distributed this report to all elected members for their information, just in terms of bringing people up to date. So committee will remember that the declaration of the climate emergency was taken by Council in July of 2019 and then latterly declaring a nature emergency in July of this year. The challenge plan was also approved by Council in July of 2021, and that sets out the steps for the Council to take to reduce our carbon emissions to net zero by 2030, and importantly also includes commitments around community leadership in acknowledgement of our role as leading in terms of the community and the impact that wider change can have to reduce our impact on the environment. You'll remember that the challenge plan itself contains 18 challenges across 3 different parts of the plan around demonstrating strong leadership in this agenda, fulfilling our responsibility to future and current generations, and also importantly making a difference now. We've just heard from Gwyn and Mike in terms of the Shoreline management plan, and that's an example of where other plans and strategies that the council currently has forms part of Project Zero, and the challenge plan itself draws the connections with each of those. The report that's referred to your committee this evening, Chair, makes it clear that Project Zero and the challenge plan doesn't replace other statutory plans or duties. It articulates the commitment to doing more and to understanding the challenge around climate change and to taking action to influence others and to encourage change across a number of areas, which include planning, energy, transport, food, green spaces and procurement. So it's important to note that decisions will need to be taken within the context of those statutory obligations and duties, as well as the financial context that the organisation is operating in. So it's about bringing all of those things into the mix. So the report that is being referred to this evening is to provide you an update on the governance and delivery of Project Zero. Appendix A to the report, because we love a governance structure and a diagram in the policy team, sets out how Project Zero is being delivered. And what it does is show the connection between a new board, so a Project Zero project board, reporting up to the Reshaping Transformational Change Programme Board, which is made up of the senior leadership team of the Council and the Cabinet, and ultimately reporting up to Cabinet with oversight from your committee chair, as well as corporate performance and resources. And Appendix B to the report that we took to Cabinet also has a project brief, which sets out the structure, if you like, for how we're going to take this important work forward. So we've identified senior responsible officers for each of the 18 challenges, and they've been tasked with developing specific and detailed plans now to take forward the steps associated with each of those challenges. And that project board will meet every other month and be chaired by the Council's Managing Director. We've also set up a project support team to make sure that the important corporate enabling functions, so departments such as finance, communications, training, the energy team, for example, are brought together in order to coordinate the work to support the delivery of each of those commitments. So there's a lot of work has commenced. The first meeting was held last month. It was a really useful session. Marcus is on the call as well, and he's a fellow SRO for a number of the commitments here. And what we talked about at that meeting was where we can put some real momentum behind some of this work. So across housing, the 21st Century Schools programme, encouraging active travel through cycling, for example, and discussing how we can accelerate the work around electric vehicle charging points across the county. So there's a series now of people working through these plans in order to get some momentum behind it. When I brought the plan to your committee chair previously, we talked as well about developing the baseline of where are we and what will have the biggest impact. Our teams in estates have worked incredibly hard over the last few months in order to complete that Welsh Government toolkit that we were talking about at a previous committee meeting. And we're just now working our way through what that data is telling us in terms of where the biggest impact our actions can have. And we'll be looking to engage some specialist skill then and expertise in order to help take us forward in that regard. And finally, the report talks about the importance of the ongoing engagement process that we've committed to through Project Zero. I mentioned at the beginning that the plan is not just about this organisation cutting our emissions to net zero by 2030. It's about demonstrating that community leadership. And it's been really great to see how engaged a number of different groups and organisations have been. We've started some work through the youth service in terms of connecting our work with the schools. We talked in the summer about Barry Island Primary School committing a whole week to this agenda, and they came up with some really innovative practice right the way across all of the year groups in that school. We met as well yesterday with a fledgling community group within WEMVO who wanted to talk about the potential around community energy and how the council can work to support those kinds of initiatives, and they are challenging us in a really constructive and positive way in terms of how we can support them. And they're just some examples of this developing green ambassadors model, where we hope that we can harness the collective energy across the county in order to reduce the impact as a whole. And I'm grateful as well to representatives from town and community councils who've joined a working group through the Public Services Board. And one of the early conversations that we've had with them as well is about how can they, at a very grassroots level, take this work forward with us in partnership. And some interesting stuff is coming out already in terms of the local places for nature funding that Marcus's team are important in supporting. So the reference this evening, as I say, is the report from the leader, just to give committee oversight in terms of the governance and delivery arrangements that we've been putting in place, and for your committee chair to note these and to pass any considerations back to Cabinet.
Okay, thank you, Tom. That's that was a great update, and you can really see now that this actually taking shape. I know when you came to us initially, it was all still, you were still trying to pull everything together, plus right in the middle of COVID as well. So that's really good to see the progress that's actually being made around there. Ruba, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Tom, for that. So I suppose my question really is, this was a good overview of of the leadership elements and the delivery strategy. So how often will you report to this committee, or will there be a report to this committee in terms of what we are delivering? Because given the urgency of the matter and the fact we have claimed it to be an emergency, it would be good to have some kind of update fairly regularly at our meetings in terms of actual deliverables and sort of what's happened. Because obviously, as Marcus will know, I will talk about the tree strategy as well, or lack of an immediate tree strategy. So I suppose it's for us to kind of keep sort of an overview of that. And I for one, I don't know how other committee members feel, but I would like to have a sort of a regular update on what's happening. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Tom, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I was going to suggest is whether we could have a look perhaps at the timing of the every other month meetings of the group, and have a look at the programme in terms of the timetable for your meetings to see what we can do in terms of synchronising those. Quarterly feels just for the mechanism of getting it to your committee like it might not work, but it does feel as if maybe 3 times a year to Cabinet may, and then as a reference onto your committee may work. But something for me perhaps to discuss with our Democratic Services colleagues, and obviously the leader in terms of the portfolio holder as well for the programme.
Yeah, I mean that sounds sensible. So you have to coordinate everything. You don't want to be caught up just reporting constantly. But actually, if we could have it 3 times a year, if we aim for that, that sounds sensible, and be quite an important update then as well. Stefan, you had your hand up. It's gone back down.
Thanks, Chair. Basically, it was just to agree with what Ruba said, and also to thank Tom for that's an excellent idea. I'd very much welcome that.
Okay, thank you. Andy, did you have a comment?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's a comment and a question, actually. Thank you for that, Tom. It's an excellent report. The question is, how do we actually know when we get to net zero? That's as an authority, as a county, whatever. And the other question is, you know my views on this anyway, but what are we doing about the other major pollutants which we're producing in huge quantities and damaging the planet with?
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. In terms of the general kind of picture around our environmental impact, those aspects would be reflected in other council policies and monitoring, such as via the nature emergency, and Marcus is on the call this evening, and there is a forward work programme for biodiversity which measures some of those particular impacts, and obviously there's a significant amount of work that the organisation does around issues such as air pollution as well, for example. In terms of the specific question in terms of our measurement of when do we get to net zero, that would be in two spaces, I guess. The first is in terms of the organisation's impact. That's what the Welsh Government toolkit that's been published in the summer of this year, and we've recently completed the first set of returns through, seeks to do. It's a really detailed model, so it looks at direct impact and direct emissions. It then looks at secondary emissions as well. So, for example, through our supply chain, when we're procuring services and goods. So that's the model seeks to answer that question in terms of how big a gap is there between our current emissions and net zero. In terms of the county's overall impact, I think some research that I was reading over the weekend suggested that a local authority has direct or indirect impact over the carbon emissions of about 30% of the overall county's emissions. So we have an important role in that leadership aspect, and that's one of the fundamental reasons for having those commitments in the plan about encouraging others to change their behaviour and activity so that the impact can be reduced overall. But I think there's some way to go in terms of measuring a county's overall impact, albeit that there are some statistical models that seek to do it in broad terms. And what I can do is, because I can't remember the name of the model that we were discussing yesterday morning, which approximates that for a geographical area, if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll make sure that that's sent through to members via Democratic Services after this meeting.
That'd be great, Tom. Thanks very much. Okay, Marcus, did you want to come in?
Yeah, really quickly, just to put a little layer on top of what Tom said, and perhaps try and answer some of the question that Councillor Robertson had, which was around, you know, what about other major polluters who are in either the Vale or South East Wales or whatever, who are basically not really covered by Climate Zero in our reports. And I think some of the things we're doing, Tom mentioned, we're trying to act in a leadership role in trying to speak to community councils, town councils and others, but we're also acting in that terms of that leadership role in terms of speaking to business. So I was at a meeting today with ABP, jointly chairing with them, with the South Wales Industrial Cluster, speaking to Tarmac, to Tata, to other huge polluters in the South Wales Industrial Cluster area, which goes right the way from Pembrokeshire to Monmouthshire, and talking about how what they can do as a group, because they formed this actual group called South Wales Industrial Cluster to look at accessing funding from UK government and other areas to try and move towards a net zero carbon economy, but also what we as local authorities and the city region and others can do to help them get there in terms of a sort of a leadership role, but also in terms of talking about the public sector in the future, perhaps buying hydrogen for its vehicles, its larger vehicles, and how do you manufacture that hydrogen? Where do you store it? Where do you do all these various things? Do you look at carbon capture for some of those industries which are, you know, very large and polluting and are not going to get to net zero for another 30 or 40 years? So those discussions, if you like, just to give some comfort, they are happening in terms of a leadership. We can't directly or we can't actually influence them through ourselves, but we can certainly help them to find ways to access funding and source routes to try and get to that point. So we are involved in that process. Okay,
lovely. Thank you, Marcus. Were you looking to come back in Andy there?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind, Chair. Just very quickly, one little facetious thing is: has anybody found it rather ironic that there's a huge shortage of carbon dioxide at the moment? The other thing is, I'm sorry, Tom. I really appreciate your effort to answer my question about how you actually measure the fact that we've got to carbon net zero. But I can't see how you can measure it in real terms. I mean, you can have a hypothesis, you can follow a model, and we've all seen how models have gone way off the beaten track over the last couple of years. You know, models just they're not something you can actually take terribly seriously. But anyway, thank you very much for your efforts, and I'm sure you are convinced that you're right and that carbon dioxide is the worst thing that ever happened to the planet. I see it as the lifeblood of the planet, but there we go. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Okay. Right, I don't think we've got anybody else who wishes to speak. Yes, Neil? Yeah.
I put in the chat bar the Welsh Public Sector Net Zero Carbon Reporting Guide for people to look at if they wanted to.
Oh.
And I know that Tom's put in the greenhouse gas reporting protocol. So there are ways and means, and it is difficult. And if you recall, we set the protocol ourselves, but it related to us, as Marcus said. So there are other polluters, and we can't control those, but we can help to guide them in the right direction. Yeah. But it's a plan for us rather than everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, and thanks Neil and Tom for that useful information. That is useful for everybody. If everybody's seen that there in the chat. I think we've had a good discussion around that, and thank you, Tom, for for presenting the report, and for Angela and Marcus as well. And I think the one consideration to send back is really the request, and what you've suggested as well is around aiming for 3 updates a year, which would go then to Cabinet and then down to us as Scrutiny and then down to corporate resources as well. So I think that would be really useful. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for that, Tom. So I said we can let Tom go if he wants to, or if he wants to stay, you're more than welcome. Okay, so the last item on the agenda is item number 6, which is the Auditor General for Wales. It's the review of the town centre regeneration in Wales. Now, Marcus, you're here, right? Phil was going to be here as well, but is it just yourself presenting this report now?
Sorry,
yes.
Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. I just want to double check. Councillor Driscoll is leaving because obviously he's declared an interest. Yeah. So I just want to double check. Sorry, Marcus.
No, sorry, don't worry.
Okay, Vince. He's still there at the moment, is he? Are you still with us, Vince?
You're not talking about me,
he's gone.
I nipped away to pick up the baby for a second. You're not talking about me, are you?
No, Vince.
Councillor Driscoll, sorry, Chair.
Yeah,
I'm very much here. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Is he still up on my screen at the moment?
Yeah.
Is he there?
Yeah. What I can do, Chair, is obviously just remove from meeting if you're happy for me to do that, because obviously he needs to, obviously not be able to attend this part. So I'll just remove him from the meeting. If you can hear us, Councillor Driscoll, I'm just going to remove you from the meeting, okay? Yeah, shown he's gone now, Chair.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Right, okay then, Marcus, over to you. As I said, I thought Phil was going to be here, but Phil isn't, obviously.
Yeah,
so
sorry, you've got my voice.
That's all right.
Apologies, yes. So this is a report that was prepared by, and I do apologise, I'm moving between computers because my work computer isn't working for some reason for this, so I do apologise for that. But this is a report that's prepared by the Auditor General for Wales in respect of a review of town centre regeneration in Wales. It was undertaken between October of 2020 and May 2021. you may consider it's a bit of a strange time to do this when we were largely in the middle of the pandemic, but it was picking up on themes which had started before the pandemic hit. The findings were published in September 2021, and there's a report which is attached to Appendix A which sets out the findings. It's important to note that the majority of the issues raised and the findings and the recommendations are mainly aimed at Welsh Government. There are some aimed at councils, and I'll try and pick those up and deal with them at the end in terms of our action plan. But it is basically looking at what has been funded in the past and how that's been funded, and perhaps what can be done better going forward. It's considered how town centres have evolved and what the town centres of today have in terms of challenges, and how we should regenerate those towns in the future. And it's concluded that some of the past national policy choices are now adversely affecting many Welsh town centres. The businesses have been well supported during the pandemic, but some local authorities have lacking the skills and capacity to create more sustainable town centres, and that town centres can continue to play an important role in the heart of Welsh life, but local and national government need to be ambitious with their regeneration agendas to help create more sustainable places. And at the back of that report, there are 6 main recommendations, and I'll just run through them quickly. That Welsh Government review the non-domestic rates to ensure the system better reflects town centre conditions when the payments holiday ends in March 2022. Secondly, Welsh Government work with local authorities to review transport challenges facing town centres and how we can best address these. 3, the Welsh Government consolidate funding to reduce bureaucracy by streamlining processes and grant conditions and keeping requests for information and supporting materials to a minimum, and to move away from annual bidding cycles to multi-year allocations and rebalance investments from capital to revenue to help local authorities address staff capacities and skill shortages. At 4, local authorities take appropriate action using existing powers and resources to achieve the best possible outcomes for town centres, using alternative means of enforcement, including compulsory purchase, integrating enforcement strategies with wider departmental strategies across housing, environmental health, planning and regeneration, and to make effective use of existing skills and resources and ensure there is capacity in the right expertise to use the full range of powers, working in collaboration with other councils to achieve good outcomes. 5, Welsh Government sets out how it plans to deliver its town centres first approach in practice, its expectations of partners and the practical steps it will take to make this ambition a reality. And 6, that local authorities use the Audit Wales Regeneration Toolkit to provide an assessment of their current approaches and identify where there is a need to improve on town centre regeneration. Obviously, those are long, wordy recommendations, but they generally make a lot of sense. So I'll come to a couple of them just to pick up on the important issues. Obviously, 1 and 2 and possibly 3 very much are recommendations aimed at Welsh Government. Although one thing I will say is that one of the things that we have and suffered perhaps as councils in the past is the issues around the various streams of funding being very disparate and different and changing on a yearly basis, with their focus changing on a yearly basis. And I think Welsh Government have very much realised that this is an issue. That's part of the reason they commissioned this report from the Audit Office, to get to a point where they realise that funding needs to be simplified and focused very much at towns, and that funding needs to be focused at all towns and not just focusing on, in particular, for example, with the Vale of Glamorgan, Barry has been the main centre, but actually by virtue of that, some of our other town centres have suffered by that focus, if you like, shifting from or being very much centred on Barry and perhaps not looking at some of the other town centres. So we welcome quite a lot of the recommendations that have come out of this this report as part of assessing what the report has asked us to do. We have produced a strategy or a response to that, which is Appendix B to the report you have before you. Obviously, recommendations 1, 3 and 5 are very much aimed at Welsh Government, and there's no response for us from that. Recommendation 2 is about many town centres have been adversely affected by charging and parking, access to transport, poor transport infrastructure, and talks about working with Welsh Government to best overcome that. So, I mean, we've listed a load of issues there. So, for example, we are obtaining free parking for 2 hours in town centres, but actually just to say a little bit about the blunt tool of parking, there has been some anecdotal evidence that charging, for example, for longer periods of parking in some of our main town centre car parks has had a positive impact in terms of churn in those town centres, and has meant that so parking is more available to those people wishing to come and shop. And I think the important point for the Vale towns is where possible, we have made sure that there are both charged and free parking for those towns available. So that's an important point to note. We are working with Welsh Government around improvements to transport and looking at transport hubs, particularly in Barry, and maximising the benefit of having the state. You know, Barry is a town with 4 railway stations, and we need to maximise the benefits of those. We are looking to gain as much access as possible to the funding that Welsh Government is making available. And that funding is now, as I mentioned earlier, is now being focused not just on Barry, although Barry is considered to be an important town with perhaps some of the biggest issues, but we are ensuring that that funding is being spread across all the towns in the Vale of Glamorgan. That has come out of COVID. You know, we very much welcome Welsh Government's flexibility now in allowing us to spread that funding across other town centres as well. You will see that I make reference in the recommendations to the placemaking grant and other grants that have been made available through Welsh Government, and other items, including smart footfall counting equipment, which has been provided by Welsh Government, or funding for which has been provided by Welsh Government, as well as other loan products. So those items are something, are a list of our responses to trying to deal with the issues raised in the audit report, and obviously in response to Welsh Government's increased flexibility in terms of how some of the money can be spent. And then, of course, the final bit of guidance which is coming, which is aimed at us, and the recommendation which is aimed at us, was around use of enforcement powers and expertise to ensure that empty buildings are not just left in town centres for the long haul. And we have been working with our colleagues in other departments, as well as planning colleagues and Regeneration team, to ensure that as much work is being done as possible to bring buildings back into use. That has been quite successful in a number of cases, through the process of loans and through the process of supporting those buildings to change their use to perhaps alternative uses as well as mixed uses. So we've listed there a whole gamut of our responses. A couple of things I'd like to add to that is that if you look at the report, the audit report, it makes reference to a toolkit which we have looked at, and colleagues in Regeneration have looked at and applied to the Vale of Glamorgan. It's fair to say the Vale of Glamorgan and all the towns in the Vale of Glamorgan are doing better than the Welsh average, and substantially better than the Welsh average in terms of vacancy rates. And some of our towns are doing extremely well, considering what they've just been through in terms of the pandemic. So, for example, even Holton Road has currently, the last figures we have are for July, but has a vacancy rate of 13.9%, where you have a Welsh average vacancy rate of 18%. Holton Road, you know, that's not saying we're going to sit on our laurels. We're doing everything we can to improve that situation with various schemes, but Holton Road is the worst in the Vale of Glamorgan. We have Penarth resting at 2.2% vacancy rate, Lantwick Major 2.97% vacancy rate, and indeed one of our weaker town centres is now Cowbridge, which is actually running at around about 11% vacancy rate. And we have today, I think today or yesterday, heard that one of the Welsh Government loan products has been approved for use in Cowbridge as well, which will help us focus on some of the empty properties in towns, in the Cowbridge town centre, as well as Barry. So I think it's fair to say we are I think we're ahead of the curve in terms of how we are dealing with the changes in town centres, and we're very focused. We have a strong team. Dave Williams, who's I'm sure you've recalled, he's been to this committee a couple of times and talked to the committee. He's very committed to looking at the vacant property issue. We've also just we're hoping to agree a meanwhile use scheme for Barry Town Centre, which will be funded via grants obtained through Welsh Government. We have got, we're hoping that a partner will run that scheme for us in the town centre. So there are a lot of activities taking place to encourage the vacancy rate to lower in our town centres. I'll shut up now.
Oh, definitely, thanks, Marcus. I say that's really informative, and it's nice to know that we are still bucking the trend, albeit we do have vacancies. But I say compared to some other towns, and some of the towns that I think we've all visited recently, we can all see that actually other areas are struggling actually more than us. I've got a couple of speakers, right? Gwyn, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The big thing about town centres, it's all right having very few vacancies, but the shops there, how are they doing? Many of them are struggling. Big thing about town centres is basically, why do you go to the town to shop? It's because there's something there that you want. It's an attractive shop to go to. And unfortunately, down the years, out of town shopping have destroyed the town centres. I mean, let's be fair, Barry was an attraction back down the years where you had Dan Evans. It was the big attraction for people in the Vale to go to Dan Evans's in Barry. He catered for so many. Unfortunately, losing Dan Evans had a huge impact on Barry. And this happens across the Vale. I mean, there's one shop in Llantwit Major that is doing extremely well because it's attracting. They're working very hard to get the business there. But really, I feel that Welsh Government should be now making a really big effort in supporting a larger business to come back into the town centres, away from these out-of-town stores. The only way you're going to get the town centres back is to get the big names back into the town. And this is something that we need. Plus the fact, now we're into climate change, shop locally and buy locally is going to be far more important than jump in your car and travel 20 odd miles to out of town. So I certainly think that we need to look upon this a little bit more across the board and basically encourage Welsh Government at the same time in with the local authorities to try and attract the businesses back into towns. And let's be fair, you look at Bridgend. Bridgend is a shadow, absolute shadow. Many of the shops there in Bridgend can shut because they're losing money. There was a shop in Llantwit Major. Sadly, there was a serious loss to a shop in Llantwit when the man sadly passed away because of his business doing so poorly. So quite honestly, this is going to be a big picture that we all need to play a part in. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Gwyn. Do you want to comment on that, Marcus, around that issue?
I won't dwell on it. I think Gwyn has hit the nail on the head. And if you read the audit report, you'll see that they pick up the issue around out-of-town retailing and policy decisions from, probably the beginning in the 80s. How those have had that negative impact on town centres, and that impact has been exacerbated, obviously, but as the move towards online shopping has really kicked in the last 4 years, 5 years, and obviously the last 2 years during COVID. So it does recognise that. I think what I would say is that probably the days of the large national retailer, they're not numbered, but they're certainly in a very difficult position now. And what Welsh Government and others who've looked at this problem and have picked up on is that actually flexibility around uses in town centres are really important. And there's been some mistakes made in other towns in the past. So, for example, where we can bring public sector or other uses into towns, that can have a really positive impact on the town. And I'll give you the example. So, for example, colleges, further education colleges, and other users, health centres, and other health hubs and advice centres can have a really positive impact and bring people into town centres. And then you get the peripheral growth of shopping associated with people visiting that after they may have been to one of these places. They can be really important. And I think that's one of the reasons in Barry why we work very closely with Cardiff and Vale College to try and keep them, actually bring them from Colcott into Barry town centre in many ways. Although the waterfront is, slightly distant from the town centre, it's as close as we're going to get for a large modern college facility. And I think it's really important that facilities like that are as close as possible to town centres, so that they themselves breathe life into it. We have a Barry Gateway scheme at the moment which seeks to work with the health board to ensure that the clinic, which is currently obviously very run down, but at the bottom end of Holton Road there, Broad Street, isn't lost, and that we have a new modern clinic as part of a wider redevelopment there, so that those people visiting the clinic, they can move on, they can go up Holton Road and they can do their shopping. So those things, I think what the issues Gwyn raised are very relevant, but we are working to sort of come to the next stage really with town centres, where they become more of a mixed use hub, where you go to do a lot of different things, but you associated with that will be retailing.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Andy, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, Marcus. What I'd like to start off by saying, this is one of the first times since I've been a councillor I actually read a report and I couldn't put it down. I think it's incredibly intelligent. It's really perceptive. And we must pay attention to it. I think what it's actually saying to us more than anything else is that we have to be adaptable. We have to be flexible. I'm just going to put into juxtaposition with what I've just said. A community liaison meeting I went to recently, which was about putting up a brown sign for the sycamore tree in wherever it is, UN, is it? And basically, the lack of sensitivity, I thought, shown towards all the people on the committee, all the community councillors who were representing their community councils. I think all the councillors were confused and couldn't understand why it was such an obvious thing that this should be done, and there were reasons being put forward why it couldn't be done. Protocols, tradition, whatever. But what we need to do is we need to be really flexible. We need to be really adaptable. When planning issues come in, like change of use and that sort of thing, we need to be able to look at the situation on an individual basis rather than on what our standard protocol is, and actually do things which are right rather than things which are traditionally done in a particular way because that's our planning regulations. Regulations obviously have to be followed, but surely at a time like this, and I think one of the things this report did incredibly well was demonstrated how we're in a changing situation. We're in a changing environment where retailing is changing, where different things need to be done in town centres. I was fascinated by the fact that actually town centres are predominantly residential. That came across in the report. But there's a couple of things which particularly came out in the report, I think, which was the necessity for easy transport other than cars to get into towns and town centres. There was more flexible planning approach to what we do with buildings which should stop being retail buildings. Maybe they can become residential, maybe they can become social hubs, whatever. The rating system. I had a shop myself about 10, 15 years ago, and the rating system was a nightmare. Basically the landlord put the rent up and your rates went up to the same level. It was crazy system. One of the big problems I think as well facing our town centres, and this is not being mentioned particularly, it is in the report, but it is a serious problem, is all the bank branches disappearing. You know, people rely on banks in towns. I mean, Dennis Parish used to have 3 banks. We haven't got a bank now. We've only got 1 post office. We used to have 2 post offices. All the banks are closing, and people in small businesses rely on banks to be able to go and cash up on a Friday, whatever. You know, I know a lot of banking is done online now, but not everybody is paying for their products and their goods in shops by credit card. I think it's a fantastic report, and I think Marcus is well on top of the case from what he said, but we do need for the Vale Council to be very flexible. One last thing is right at the back of the report, there's a business improvement district. I was disappointed to see that Barry isn't on there. You know, it's I'm sure a bid was put in by the Vale and by Barry Council, but by Barry Town Council. Stefan can confirm this or not. But I you know, why isn't Barry on the business improvement districts list? I can't understand that. Anyway, thank you very much, Chair, and back to you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, Barry turned it down is the simple answer to that one, unfortunately. But no, you've made some really good points there, Andy, and I think the banks is a really important point, and it's something I've often mooted about why we can't have all the banks in one bank. Basically, a multi-bank. You know, where they could have their own bits even, but to me it would make the sense, because obviously numbers have reduced who are actually physically going to the bank. So why not have them all in one of the big sort of stores that could be turned into what I call like a multi-bank? But perhaps that's too simple, I don't know. Anyway, Marcus, did you have some responses there?
Thank you, Chair. No, I agree wholeheartedly with what Councillor Robertson has said in the main. Flexibility of use and changes of use, that is something we've adopted over the last sort of 2 years, acknowledging the difficulties with retailing in town centres. The review of the LDP will take this further, and will make, you know, as Councillor Robertson said, the policies were dated in terms of protecting retail in town centres from other uses. When, you know, at the end of the day, if those retail users aren't there to come and take the premises, you can't keep a property empty forever. What's the point in that? So it is something that we've been looking at for a number of years now, but will be put much more firmly into policy over the next year or so as part of the review of the LDP. Transport definitely is an issue. Barry should be in a much better position. I mentioned it's got 4 stations. We are working around having the integrated transport hub in Barry at Barry Dock Station. The biggest issue for us really is the length of time it takes to implement some of these things. You know, John Dent, who's the project manager who's been working on that's been working on it for 2 years now. You've got to bring all together Transport for Wales, Welsh Government, the city region in this particular case, plus the bus operators, and it's not an easy task. He's getting there slowly, but unfortunately these things just take so much time to bring to fruition. The rates issue is a Welsh Government issue. I believe they're looking at it, and I hope they are looking at it, because it's very much one of the key issues that's picked up by this report. And the other thing I would say is that, you know, Councillor Robertson's hit the nail on the head with banks, and the report further into it does talk about banks. It doesn't really go any further other than to pick out that it's a major loss to town centres. I suppose because as a private operator, it's very difficult to force them to do anything. The UK government could, I suppose, by looking at rates and by looking at taxes and everything else, if you're pulling out of town centres. One point I would make is obviously the post office does offer a service of sort of minimal banking for all banks. But that doesn't help if your post office is gone as well. So that's an issue. And finally, obviously, the business improvement district, that was an avenue we were pursuing for some years. Unfortunately, and I think probably would change now, but when we were getting close to going for a vote we were clearly going to lose that because the businesses just weren't supportive of it in Barry. We have an issue in Barry in some respects because there are two big town centres, if you like, or big. The Holton Road is the biggest. You've got High Street, and then you've got a couple of smaller town centres around. And I think what we were finding was that the views of some of the bigger operators were being diluted by some other views. I suspect that might change, and I wouldn't dismiss business improvement districts forever, but there's a lot of work in trying to get it back to a position where we would go to a vote again to get one. So I think we would try and implement a lot of the other things I've talked about before, perhaps going back and looking whether there was an appetite again for a business improvement district. We haven't dismissed it, but obviously we don't want to go. It's probably about 18 months since we were pretty much had it thrown back in our face, so we wouldn't go straight back to that. We'd leave it a little bit of time and see if there was something that would happen there. So I hope I've answered a few of your questions, or at least agreed with most of what you said, Councillor Robertson.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. Okay, Stefan.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, extremely illuminating, as Andy pointed out, and Marcus. Yeah, I'm glad to hear what you're saying. You know, I'm going to be very Barry-centric, obviously, and I'm just thinking, you know, one united chamber of trade for the whole of the town might be a nice idea as well. You know, instead of the us and them, Holton Road, High Street. That there are so many things that this report throws up. And I was reading it, and it was saying, I'm referring to my other devices. I'm looking away all the time. But you know, it said one thing that really interested me, which is a town. It says here, town centres are mostly geared for the daytime retail economy and mostly have a limited leisure, social, and nighttime offer. And I think that's why I would welcome, for example, the idea of having, you know, nice new flats in Holton Road above sort of boutique shops. And I welcome that in Holton Road, for example, places like Awesome have opened. You've got a lovely designer baby clothes shop, but they're all suffering from lack of footfall, especially the baby clothing shop. And what I would say about the idea of having flats in Holton Road is that they've got to be good flats. And I'm going to call up the elephant in the room here. Grotty Bedsits owned by slum landlords and with a stink of weed coming from them does nothing for the economy of the town, as does graffiti. And also the other perception, having gone through Holton Road from the top of the Tadros right to the bottom and actually spoken to traders, the one thing that struck me was their number one gripe was to do with the perception of law and order. Obviously, it's a police issue, but the perception that after 3 o'clock, you don't want to be in Holton Road. And that's a real shame. And I think another thing to note is, other than the law and order issue and the antisocial stuff, getting to Holton Road, talking to marshals, the butchers, it's easy to get to Asda and Morrison's off the main road, but if you're driving in, and I'm saying driving here, you don't really want to go into Holton Road, because when you get off Gladstone Bridge, yeah, how do you get to Holton Road? Well, if you know how to get there, it goes all the way around, and it's not a destination in itself. The trains issue is another one. I mean, the thing about the cars there was that they were saying, oh yeah, it'd be nice if we didn't make it one way, if we made it 2A again. I'm not sure about that, but it certainly needs, as you say, it does need looking at again, I think, anew. The trains, actually, it feels as if Barry Dock is miles away as a train station from Holton Road. Of course, it isn't. It's the perception that it's miles away, and I just don't know what we do about that. But I think there needs to be something done that as soon as you get off at Barry Dock Station, that lovely avenue down Thompson Street, if we can make that look even more inviting, and you know, moves have been done. You know, a bit of public art has been placed there. Something has to be done, but I think creating Holton Road as a destination in itself, that is the key to it. And that's why I was hoping that we could brag a bit more about the fact that there is free parking in Barry. You don't have to pay as soon as you park there. It's 2 hours free. And I think we need to let people know more about what's happening with the multi-storey car park as well. Finally, my only other thing was something I've been going on about for 20 years now, which is the need for an arm's length marketing events body that promotes the centre of this town, so that whenever you go to Barry, you don't know what's going on, but you know that something is going on and you want to go there. But that's my 4 pence worth anyway. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Stefan. Marcus, did you want to respond to anything, or just taking note really of? Sorry, Marcus, you're on mute. No. All right, I think we've actually lost Marcus. He's frozen now as well. Yeah, it's some.
Chair, don't worry. I'll send my comments in. I'll write them. Send them.
That's it. I think it's useful that we could feed. Oh, there you are. He's back.
I'm back. Sorry.
Right.
I was having problems with my earphones. No, it was just to say really quickly that so a couple of the issues raised by Councillor Willem, they're dealt with or were being dealt with. So just really quickly, the issue of public safety and the perception of public safety, we've actually secured nearly £500,000 worth of funding to look at replacing CCTV cameras in Holton Road, which we're working with colleagues in South Wales Police to deliver, and I think that has to be spent. Hopefully, I think it's actually by this end of this financial year, but there may be an extension on that because of issues around sourcing cameras. But certainly that's part of a wider scheme to make Holton Road feel safer. There is a really comprehensive events programme we've worked up jointly with Barry Town Council for Christmas, but beyond Christmas as well, where we hope to encourage people into the town. And it's fair to say that quite a lot of marketing was done, and we secured funding for marketing for Holton Road as part of the COVID recovery strategy, and that will continue that marketing exercise. So, we maybe not arm's length, although we are doing it through the Visit the Vale branding, and we are doing a lot of marketing around coming to the town centres, including High Street, including Holton Road in Barry, but also some of the other town centres as well, to encourage people so that there are events there and they can see those events. So it is happening. It's difficult. It has been difficult up till now because of the issues around COVID and what have you, but we are beyond that now, and we hope that that sort of support will grow for the town centres in terms of events and working with the town councils and the and also traders groups to support their own events as well.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. Okay, Vince, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll keep it quite brief. I've got a baby next to me, might pipe up any second. A lot of what I wanted to say was covered by Stefan in some respects anyway, and I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of it. Perhaps partly the us and them kind of attitude between the two different distinct town centres might be something to do with the types of shops that you see on Holton Road, and it's really nice to see things like Awesome Wales coming on to Holton. And I guess one of the biggest challenges we face in not just making the approach and making it look aesthetically more pleasing, Holton Road, is to try and encourage more independent, boutique-y kind of shops, shops, restaurants. You've got a lot of that on High Street and not as much of it on Holton Road. So I agree again with the point you made about residential on top of Holton Road. You're not going to get nice flats unless you've got nice shops, and maybe there's a chicken and egg situation there as to which you can attract first to improve that area. But I think that's the thing. It's a brilliant offer. It's well situated, and if we could just be a little bit more ambitious in trying to fill some of the empty shops and to improve some of the types of retail offer on Holton Road, I think we'd go a long way to sort of achieving these aims and making Barry an even better destination for people. You've kind of stolen my thunder a little bit on some of the things you said there, Stefan. I agreed with you this evening. So there we are. Thank you, though.
Okay, thanks, Vince. Michael, you're next.
Yeah, it's just a very, very quick point, which has been touched on by a few speakers tonight. And I think it's when we're making decisions that affect town centres, communities and whatever, it's awfully important to make sure that we are consulting with the people who
live and work there. And I think one of the challenges always is that people as a whole just don't respond to consultations. There's a terribly small take up, isn't there? You know, in some cases it's like 120 people out of 120,000. But is there a way that we can, and Marcus was talking about marketing and some very good points and observations there, but people are very good at complaining when decisions are made and they haven't taken any role in it in the first place. But how can we improve that consultation process to engage with the people who live in the communities and have businesses in the communities so that it grows in a more natural way? Because things have changed. You know, as Gwyn was saying, I remember, you know, the main place we went shopping when I was a little boy was Dan Evans. Everybody went there on a Saturday morning and stuff, but those things don't exist anymore. People wouldn't dream of traveling into Holton Road on a Saturday morning to go shopping anymore, and that's never going to go back. But we need to make sure that the towns are nice places to live, to shop, to work, and the people who live there can surely help us to reach those decisions. So improving consultation, how can we do that?
Okay, thanks, Michael. Marcus?
It's a very difficult conundrum because people don't always engage, just as Councillor Morgan said. One of the things we have done in Barry and has actually been quite successful is develop a place board, which has on it a number of different traders and representatives from sort of different parts of the town, in particular High Street and Holton Road, but also, if you like, people with an interest in town centres. And that place board is slightly independent of the council and has been used to steer some funding in terms of things like the lighting that was done in the Hood Road tunnel, some of the new signage that's going up, some of the signage that's gone up in terms of Thompson Street and trying to encourage people to walk from the station up Thompson Street. There's also some new signage that's been developed in terms of placemaking and wayfinding for the town centre. So we are trying to engage through a number of different mechanisms. It's not always easy because, as you quite rightly say, Councillor Morgan, people don't always want to engage. But I would say that the traders, our relationship with the traders on both Holton Road and High Street is as good as it's been. We have forums which we use to give news and to take advice from them and listen to their concerns. And you know, there are a couple of key players coming out of that work who are sort of acting, if you like, as conduits to other traders and other businesses in those areas. One final point, though, I think you know, a couple of the councillors have mentioned this point around the difference between High Street and Holton Road, and we have tried to break that down over the years, and it hasn't always been successful. There is this problem that High Street is very much an independent street. Holton Road has been the multiples. That is changing slightly, and I think we're seeing our interactions improving to a certain extent because the multiples perhaps aren't quite so dominant in terms of Holton Road. But we will continue to work with them. We still have a town centre officer who works with all the traders to try and keep them informed and get information from them and you know, find out from them what they think we need to do in particular areas. And we work as closely as we can to try and improve it. And I would say, I mean, I was down Holton Road last week, and my experience is Holton Road is although there are issues of graffiti, I wouldn't stand away from that, and obviously we have some vacant properties, it's still looking quite vibrant compared to some of the other towns across South Wales that I've been to with other meetings. And I think, you know, we need to, while we can never stand still, we need to be proud that Barry is, if you like, being pretty resilient in terms of a very difficult time for towns across South Wales and across the UK.
Okay, thanks for that. Could I just ask a question around? It's about women's safety, particularly young women, because obviously, you know, we've had recent events in the news which has really brought it to the forefront, and it's just about, you know, Stefan raised up there about sort of that CCTV and that feeling of safety, and I just wondered, is there any work being done particularly around young women as they move around? I think particularly it's like the nighttime economy. I mean, for instance, my daughter went with a couple of her friends. There's Surreyors, which just opened up just at the top of Holton Road there, by just opposite Iceland there. it's like a ice cream parlour in the day, and it's a bit of a cocktail bar in the evening. And they went and they had a lovely time. You know, a few cocktails, a couple of girls. But the issue is when they came to come home. It's about that safety, and like there's nobody around. And I mean, we just came to my husband actually stayed up late, and we had to pick them up, which was interesting both. But he actually went to pick them up because we just felt that we needed somebody there, because we didn't want them walking home or even walking down to where the taxis are on their own. And I just wondered, is there any particular work being done around promoting women's safety at night time?
So, Chair, there is a community safety officer, Debbie Gibbs, who is working on and has been working on schemes with South Wales Police and with others. Debbie's not here, and I'm not fully au fait on all the work she's been doing. I know it's working with Debbie is how we've secured the funding for the CCTV for town centres, because safety has been flagged up as a particular issue, particularly around Holton Road. And there have been particular issues during the lockdown around, I won't go into them now, but there have been particular issues which have caused concerns. So I know, you know, obviously the community safety team is in Miles's area, and I know they have been doing work about female safety, following on from some of the things that happened. It might be worth something we can ask Debbie to give us a bit of a feedback on that, perhaps at another meeting. It's slightly different to what we're talking about now, yes, obviously, yeah. but it is directly.
But it does link in, yeah.
We're using town centre funding to secure this money for the CCTV, so it is directly relevant, and people want to feel safe when they come to towns, otherwise they won't come. So yeah. It is relevant, but you know, I think pass that message on to community safety team to talk a little bit about what's been happening. There has been work undergoing, and I think that's really important. And actually, the Police and Crime Commissioner has written to the leader very recently about the difficulties in managing that. And you know, I really hope that the funding we've secured for CCTV will improve that situation.
Okay, lovely, thanks for that. Andy, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I responding to what you've just said and what Marcus has just said, CCTV is great, especially after the event. But I think one of the things everybody in the country is desperate to see is Bobby's back on the beat, and it ain't happening. You know, why isn't it happening? This is what we want, really, is policemen walking around town centres at night. I remember from my childhood walking around Tiverton in Devon. There were, you know, it's only a small country town. There were always policemen walking around. You couldn't get away with anything.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Right, I don't think we've got any other speakers. So thanks for that, Marcus. It's been a really, really good and interesting discussion. And it's a great document, actually. There's a lot of work within there, and actually a lot of work that is relevant and reflects a lot of the work they were actually doing here as well. Got a couple of recommendations there. So the first one is about that we consider that report, and then also the council's response to the review and the Audit Wales recommendations, which are contained there at Appendix B for everybody. So I think we're all happy. We've had a good discussion. You okay there, Andy?
Yeah. I'm fine, thank you, Chair. It's just I'm being put upon.
Okay, just wondered if you were losing the plot a little bit, but it's okay, that's fine.
Ages ago, years ago.
Okay, and then the second recommendation is that this report then is referred on to the Governance and Audit Committee, and also then on to Cabinet for endorsement of the proposed actions to address the proposals for improvement. So we'll be happy to agree those recommendations. Lovely, that's great. Right, okay, hang on, I've lost my agenda now. Okay, item number 7 then. I haven't got any items which are urgent under part 1, and I've got no items which are urgent under part 2 either. So I'd just like to say thank you everybody for your inputs to the meeting. We've had some really good discussions there tonight. It's been really interesting. So thank you, Marcus. You're the last officer standing, so thank you very much.
Usually,
Yeah, that's very true. And just thanks to everybody for attending, and we'll see you all in the December meeting. Okay, thank you,
Chair.
everybody.
Good night.
Bye.